Welcome everyone to episode 48 of IOH, Indexer Office Hours. Today is February 15th, 2022, and we've already posted the agenda into Office Hour chat in Discord, and you can follow the agenda there. If you're new to Indexer Office Hours, we love participation. I think I should also reintroduce myself if you have been joining the Indexer Office Hours over the last few sessions, and today I'm helping out with this. My name is Anna, and I work for GraphOps with Chris Vessels and Juan. Okay, so today we have a lot of topics planned. Mainly because we need to catch up with Repo Watch and Protocol Watch over the last few weeks when we haven't run this. So first of all, let's talk very quickly about the recent 𝗨𝗪𝗂𝗪 podcasts. So since last time we spoke, we've had three different episodes. One of them was from David Rutherford, and he's talking about mostly about the differences between hosted service and mainnet and why they both exist. He's also talking about his thoughts on the relationships between Web3 and Web2 and how he sees them coexisting together. That I was very interested to hear those thoughts. And also describes a bit about how the different 5 core dev teams are working together and how they all bring to the table, as well as his background on how he got into Edge and Node. So highly recommend this episode. The next episode that was released, episode 50, was by 𝗨𝘀𝗪 from the Guild. In this episode, he talks a lot about open source, his views on open source and how they sometimes differ with the overall larger community, why he believes so much in open source, how open source is a lot about continuous learning and leadership, and just in general, if you're a proponent of open source software, I really enjoyed this episode. And then the last episode since our last chat was episode 51 with 𝗨𝘀𝗲 from Multicoin. And 𝗨𝘀𝗲 talks about the importance of credible neutrality, the difference between decentralization and credible neutrality. And he's also talks about his point on how aggressive the Graph Foundation has been in their quest to support further growth. And by aggressive, I mean aggressive in a positive way. And how they've been working with the Graph to create grants and a lot of new developments, as well as creating new core dev teams and all of the amazing things that are happening with the Graph Foundation as well as the Graph. So again, give that a listen. Now, let's move on to Repo Watch. So there have been a lot of changes since the last time. On Get, we have a new version, a new release, fresh off the press from 5 hours ago. It contains a lot of bug fixes and just all sorts of typos that were in the repo. But in addition to that, there's some networking improvements and performance improvements. So includes support for random opcode and other internal refactorings, improves tracing by making the pre-state tracer be a native tracer, improves transaction indexing performance, and the new dev peer-to-peer binary now supports doing Snap V1 protocol testing against the remote node, which can now be used for Hive testing as well. There's also a new diagnosis command to show database metadata. So highly suggest you check this out. And the ETH client now supports call contracts at hash. And a big improvement has been that chain ID support has been included in Gnosis safe transactions, which makes it possible to use makes it possible to transact with safe contracts on version 1.3.0. Moving on to Aragon, there have been through quite important releases ever since the last IOH. So we have version 2022-0103 beta was that improves performance for pool reprocessing on baseware changes, which means that everyone is getting an improvement in latency of 10 milliseconds for a pool that's about 250K size in transactions. Then we have some further fixes to transaction parsing and encoding, some performance improvements for TX pool content, and then we have the transactions with gas parameter larger than current block gas limit. They no longer get promoted to pending anymore. We also have a MDBX assertion fix that allows databases to grow over 4 terabytes without crashing. This is a significant one. And we've added experimental watch the burn stage, which allows for tracking issues via Aragon issuance RPC method. Then on this particular release, there's a P2P Sentry propagation for peer disconnected event to Aragon. Now, I would like to, before we move to the other two releases, I'm just wondering if anyone has tried this release on Aragon and if they have any thoughts. I can see some people are raising their hands. Martin, do you want to add something?
No, just helping to moderate.
Okay, so if there's no comments, I'll move on to the next version, next release. Next release on Aragon is version 2022-0201 beta that includes some memory leak fixes in the transaction pool, which fixes a failure in transaction pool content RPC method. Then we also have a fix for slow pending transaction feeds for Ether Subscribe. We have added some behavior that penalizes peers for more cases of invalid RLPs. And then we also have a compatibility fix for getting transaction by block hash and index. And then the last release we have on Aragon has been version 2022-02 beta. That basically, one of the improvements is that node database is closed if Aragon fails to start up. Then there is a compatibility fix for parity list storage keys. Then we have a compatibility fix for get transaction by hash, which means that this doesn't fail when transaction is not found in the database and in the transaction pool. So it returns null instead. We also added some asynchronous state streaming and new head notifications, plus some updates to pre-verified hashes for Ropsten and mainnet. The way I see this last release is mainly improvements on the previous two releases based on feedback. Moving on to Open Ethereum. We don't have any new releases. The last release was version 3.3.3, which implements EIP 3607. Moving on to streaming fast Go Ethereum. We have a new release for a BSC version 1.18 DM. So be sure to check that out. Onto the Graph Stack release. Looking at GraphNode, we don't have a new official release, the last one being 0.27.0. However, we have a new pre-release, so version 0.25.1. That addresses a few things. So it addresses an issue with decoding the input of some calls when subgraphs that would try to index contract related to those would fail. It fixes a non-deterministic issue with the retry mechanism for error. It adds support for Solidity custom errors, and this is related to issue 2577. Ottavio, I think you have some comments on this. It's mostly your release.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to mention that the third one, it's probably going to be for 26 or 0.25.2. But yeah, the first two ones, those are the ones that are going in this release.
Okay, that sounds good. And we were notified by one of our members that who have tried this release in production, that they have had some issues with tests. So it's important to say that before moving this release into your production database, make sure you test it first. Any comments on that, Ottavio or anyone else?
Yeah, we're gonna do like the official release is probably gonna be between like today or tomorrow, like this week for sure, and then we can inform like if you have to prepare anything. But I think it will probably work just fine. I can check with this person later, like what issue did they have. But yeah.
Okay, awesome. And then on GraphNode, we also have some ongoing work onto Tendermint integration. So there is a pull request 3212. If you want to check it out, it will probably be merged very soon. So yeah, been working on Tendermint integration. Moving on to indexer service and agent. So there haven't been any new releases since 0.18.6. However, there are quite a few pull requests that are worth mentioning. So if we look at pull request 357, this is from last indexer office hours. This was fixing indexing status query used for health endpoint. So that has been merged. Then we have pull request 352. This PR speeds up the frequency of checking indexing rules and triggers reconcile deployments within 20 seconds of changing the rules. So indexers would not need to restart the agent after seeing the rules. So this has been merged as well. Then we have pull request 364. So when an indexer wants to close an allocation for a failed subgraph with undeterministic errors, the agent either in the current behavior, the agent receives either a 0 or a null proof of index, and they won't be able to close the allocation. So this pull request, which is a work in progress, is introducing a new behavior so that if a subgraph failed after current epoch start block, then you'd get your proof of indexing from the current epoch start block. if the subgraph failed during the previous epoch, then you would get the proof of indexing from the previous epoch start block. If the subgraph failed before the previous epoch, then you get the proof of indexing from the latest valid block. And if the proof of indexing is not available at all, then that would result in an undefined proof of indexing or a throw error of 0 or null proof of indexing. So I'm really excited to see this going. We also have pull request 362, which is also work in progress. This adds a filter such that an indexer agent rejects to allocate to unsupported subgraphs. And by unsupported subgraphs, we specifically mean subgraphs that are not eligible for indexer rewards. So to support this, we're basically adding an additional Boolean field required supported to indexing rules, which defaults to true, but you can overwrite it. So hopefully this will go in very, very soon, and that would mean that everyone will have to update their indexing rules. Last pull request on indexer service and agent is pull request 349, which is work in progress. This adds automatic batching of query voucher redemption. So we're adding additional CLI arguments to control voucher batching behavior. Now this is work in progress, and there's another work stream that talks about partial voucher redemption. So we'll watch this space, and we'll update on the next IOH which one of these, whether it's batch voucher redemptions or partial vouchers, which one of them would be merged. Other than that,
so I just had one question regarding PR 349. Is that so? Is it work in progress just because we're waiting for that decision to come through, or is there some other technical thing that needs to be addressed prior to merging?
So right now there's a couple of suggestions on the PR. So it's work in progress because of some suggestions, and because it's not a fully passing CI, but also because we haven't fully looked in the partial voucher redemption and figured out how they fit in together. So the batched voucher redemption has been tested and it works, but it hasn't been merged. So it's just we need to make the decision and look at everything. Does that answer your question?
Yep, makes sense to me.
Okay, cool. This is all I had for Repo Watch. Does anyone have questions?
I have just one comment just to mention that the Tendermint integration, as Anna said, like some PRs are opened, and who's helping with this is Figment. So it's been really cool to collaborate with them, and yeah, that's all.
Awesome. Yes, thank you, Figment, for your work. And sorry, Kai, go ahead.
No, I was just saying right on.
Okay. All right. If there's nothing else on, no more questions or comments on Repo Watch, I will hand over to Juan for Protocol Watch.
Hey guys, so yeah, we have, well, as Anna mentioned, we have tons of stuff to cover here. First, I want to do a disclaimer. I'm joining GraphOps along with Anna and Chris. So yeah, I updated my name. So yeah, I'm part of GraphOps now. Going with Protocol Watch now. Hopefully that didn't scare anyone. going with Protocol Watch, we have like 3 pull requests for the contracts. They are sort of like exploratory pull requests. They are nothing. I think there's nothing decided, but they are exploring some options. For example, pull request 543 is an exploratory PR to allow anyone to close allocations after the max allocation period has elapsed, which is 28 days. Previously, or rather currently, you can only close someone else's allocations after 28 days, only if you are a delegator, which is kind of like easy to work around. You just need to delegate an extremely low amount, pay the fees for the transaction, that's it. This PR would allow anyone to do that without the need to actually do the workaround and pay the fees. I mean, it hasn't been decided nothing has been decided yet, but it's just exploratory PRs for now. This will also link to some open discussion that we'll have afterwards about stale allocations with Sam from Semiotic and some other governance and research related updates. 544% of POI when opening an allocation is also an exploratory PR, which, well, as the title says, would allow or rather require proof of indexing when opening an allocation. Again, completely exploratory. There are some possible desirable traits from this approach, like making sure that anyone has the subgraph that they want to serve data already synced when opening an allocation, and so no one can actually not be able to sync it in time for closing, if that makes sense. Most indexers, I think, are already doing this with off-chain subgraph indexing. This will kind of formalize the requirement if passed. But yeah, it's just exploratory for now. And then there's 540, which is the just a chore. I think Fubi tried to add Foundry for testing in the contracts. Again, just exploratory. Moving, anyone has any questions regarding these PRs? Seems like no one has questions, so we'll move on. Core network, yeah.
Sorry, I was mucking around with the microphone, Juan. So PR 544, the proof of indexing when open. Was there ever a decision as to how to account for the work in actually bringing up to sync with a new subgraph?
In what sense?
Well, so I mean that there's some amount of effort involved in actually indexing the subgraph prior to actually serving out indices. So with some of the larger ones, you're talking about a week and a half, 2 weeks of compute work in order to do that. Will having the POI required prior to opening the allocation or at the moment of opening the allocation remove compensation for the work to bring up to index?
Yeah, there are some discussions regarding that particular aspect. I think the main issue, this is just, again, it's just exploratory PRs to see if this is something that can be done and that won't really have a lot of impact from the development side, because some other possible improvements to the protocol are actually quite intensive in development work. This is just checking whether the addition for POI requirements and opening allocations is actually complex at the contract level. I think it's not, given that the PR is already there yet. I think there are many discussions going on about this, so nothing's extremely clear. There are some concerns regarding whether requiring POIs before opening allocations is something that, as you mentioned, won't be compensating indexers for the work that they've done syncing it. But at the same time, there are some arguments that, well, indexers are already kind of pre-indexing subgraphs anyways, mostly because, well, as you mentioned, some of them take a long time to sync. For example, Uniswap, it's notoriously slow. So if you don't really pre-sync the subgraph, you might not be able to close it in time properly with a proper POI. So it's kind of like a formalization, a possible formalization of this behavior, which also has some positive traits with it. With the easiest example would be, okay, you are already synced, so you're already serving proper data on queries, which is of course a desirable trait for any indexer. But as you mentioned, there are some possible downsides, and they are being discussed. I think I don't remember if there's a forum post for this, but if there's not, we should probably open one up. But yeah, there are some concerns, as you mentioned, Kai.
Yeah, I think the positive aspects of that are definitely worth pursuing this even further. Whether or not we resolve the pre-work and compensation is yet to be. Okay, I understand. Thank you.
No worries. Moving forward, core network subgraphs, there's no new updates in the last IOH. There will be some hopefully next week, but for now it's no new updates. Going to forum governance, we have two major topics. One we will be discussing afterwards with Sam, if we have the time, which is the rewarded force close mechanism to eliminate stale allocations. This has to do with zombie indexers, as they are being called right now, which are basically allocations that have greatly exceeded like the 28-day period, and that are basically sapping rewards from everyone else, and they are not being closed at all because they are super small, or maybe they are not small, but they just are non-viable to, or you'll be burning ether just to close them basically. Then there's a possible allow multiple undelegation request from a delegator. So basically some delegator improvement proposals or discussions going on in governance. Moving on to forum research, there are a few noteworthy posts. There's the querying subgraphs from Unity Game Engine with Rorschach Gaming SDK. So there's, I think it's a Wave 3 grantee. They're building some integration with Unity, given that metaverse-related stuff is super hype right now. It's super cool to see those waves, grants from Wave 3 being worked upon. Then there's a sort of like a request or proposal to enable contract creation tracking on the subgraphs. I don't know if there are many subgraph developers here, but one of the I mean, I don't know if it's super important for all use cases, but you sometimes want to have some tracking on when subgraphs, I mean, data sources, or rather contracts are being created, and what are the initialization parameters for those contracts. Currently, you can't handle those. You usually need to add like an anonymous event handler or something along those lines to be able to pick up the initialization data. So it will be amazing to have contract creation tracking for Subgraph in particular. And he's been researching on what would that require from the graph node improvement. So yeah, super cool to see it in research. Then we are moving on to another like kind of like request, or rather like a question in the forums regarding how to deploy a subgraph that uses multiple networks simultaneously using the same project. Most of us just do it with Mustache or some other templating tool, but it could be also discussed whether we might need a formal tool to do this. I heard someone wants to say anything.
Hey, sorry, I only just jumped on, but we're actually looking at that in terms of like updating configurations and better tooling for sort of instantiating and then updating subgraphs from Graph CLI. So if there's folks who want to talk about that, then that would be great.
Super cool. Yeah. I think if anyone wants to discuss it, we can probably do it in the open discussion segment. But yeah, sure, sounds great. And then there's the last topic from Protocol Watch, which is why we brought Dave here. He's proposing some standardization of APIs. So basically, I think we'll be discussing this later, but he's basically working on creating some standard for lending subgraphs, like for example, subgraphs that are indexing compound data, Aave data, or some other lending platform data. And having a standard for all of those would be greatly beneficial for everyone, given that it would make composability in any layer, be it like a UI and front end, or maybe a composability layer, which might be, I don't know, something of like an aggregation service or something, or maybe like a composable subgraph might be in the future. It would greatly benefit from having standards to the way the data is going to be exposed. So yeah, we'll be discussing that later. Moving forward, well, we have the ongoing points of interest, which are basically recurring interesting topics. Since Chris is not here, we can probably skip these ones. Aside from the minor issue with M1 support, there has Chris has been having an issue with M1 building the indexer repo, and realized it was basically the Rust default toolchain being set instead of to ARM, which is the M1 native execution. It was set up to 8x86 by default, so he just needed to change that in case anyone's also running into some issues with Mac M1 and the indexer repo. Okay, now moving forward with open discussion. We have a ton of open discussion today, and it would be amazing to be able to include all of those per request, per Jim's request. Do you want to start, Alexis, with the issues with the enzyme subgraph? I'm not sure if it's only related to enzyme, but that's how you mentioned it.
Yeah, hi. I'm trying to be quick. So yeah, I noticed the problem on enzyme, and it's pretty straightforward. So I'm running GraphNode version 0.25.0, and what I noticed is that the enzyme last week crashed. And I restarted my GraphNode, and it restarted indexing without any errors. It went for a little bit, then crashed again. Then I restarted the GraphNode again, and then it went for a little bit, etc., until it crashed definitively. And that's, I'm pretty sure that's unexpected behavior, because we don't really have determinism in terms of where really the subgraph crashes, because it shouldn't restart correctly if you restart the graph node. So, and that's also a problem that's a little bit more, I mean, it doesn't happen as often, but it also happens on the graph network subgraph, the one that ends with HFR. It's the same thing. Officially, for most people, it's broken, but after restarting my graph node a few times, it restarted indexing without any errors. I noticed that problem both with using Aragon and Geth. So yeah, a little bit of a problem. So I had to close with a 0 POI that enzyme subgraph, because at that point I didn't know what's the actually good last POI, because I did some weird stuff with that subgraph. So yeah, but just a heads up, and that's there's an open issue about this. So yeah.
Yeah, it seems it's been investigated. I don't know, Otavio, if you have some news about it, or is Leo on it?
I just saw the thread here. I think Adam just tagged me, but I didn't take a look yet. But that's very interesting. We're definitely gonna look this very soon.
Awesome, great to hear. Has anyone had something else to mention about the enzyme subgraph, or rather the determinism issues that we're facing with enzyme and some other subgraphs?
Also, I would like to thank for reporting this, because it's good to have a example to, because I think Juan was having a similar, you were having like a similar issue with this, right?
Oh yeah, but it was a lot weirder, I guess. Yeah, I had some determinism issues with particularly the loop ring subgraph, But given that it was extremely complex in the way that it handled data, basically it was all bytecode data that was being handled in the subgraph, there were many like failure points that could be like triggering this particular error. I haven't seen any of those extremely undeterministic errors on like regular subgraphs. That's why I wasn't like super concerned. But yeah, it's cool that we have an example and that Otavio is looking at it, and Leo, I guess, too.
I'm just wondering if the work in progress pull request on index of service and agent that helps with getting a POI for undeterministic errors. So I'm wondering if that new behavior would actually be useful in this case as well. I'm not sure. Like I'd have to look into it. But yeah, this is just an idea.
Well, I'm not sure it helps here because it's not even sure what the official block of the subgraph crash should be, because for me it crashed at 6-7 different places.
I see. Okay. So maybe not.
Cool. So moving forward, I mean, anyone has something to add to this particular issue?
So I think I think Alex, you initially reported it, and then I think did Jim say he'd seen it as well. But I was wondering if anyone else had seen this specific error, or if anyone else is indexing the enzyme subgraph, who we could also reach out to if we're as we investigate this. If you are, also just feel free to reach out on Discord. That'd be great. Thanks.
I don't think Jim's on the stage right now.
He had some issues with his voice, so yeah, he's on chat basically. Cool. So should we move forward? Anyone has anything to add? Okay. Next up, we're gonna be discussing I guess it's a proposal, Sam, regarding a new mechanism to incentivize closing stale allocations, right?
Sam, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Yeah, exactly. We can probably postpone it for a little bit until he gets his mic working, maybe. We also have the Subgraph API standardization if we want to basically kill a little bit more time. Okay, let's move forward with the Subgraph API standardization discussion, and we can get back to the stale allocation one when Sam's mic is working. So, well, basically, Dave here, thankfully he's joining IOH this week to discuss this, has proposed standardization of lending subgraphs. So the API for all of them is usable and composable no matter the underlying nature of the protocol. There are many lending protocols have different fields and maybe different data structures and so on. So standardizing that at the subgraph layer would be amazing. And I think you're pretty far down, like some sort of like first standard for the lending subgraph, probably, right?
Yeah, I can kind of explain what exists. Like right now in the forum, there is a standard that is presented, and it's basically just a schema right now that kind of goes over what a basic lending protocol is. And I would say there's 5 types of like functions or events that commonly happen in a lending protocol, which is depositing collateral, withdrawing collateral, borrowing an asset, and then repaying an asset. and then liquidation. And you can take those 5 events, and although they're named different things in every Ethereum protocol out there and lending protocol, they have different functions, they have different implementations, they have different names, but they're essentially the same 5 functions. And then so you look at protocols like Aave, Compound, Maker, and Abracadabra, in Synthetics, and Rye, and Liquidity, and they're all essentially lending and borrowing protocols implemented in different ways, but you could extract all of the lending and borrowing data from them in those 5 types of events. And so with that, you can kind of start to build on top of that. And first you look at those 5 events, and then you build an entity type like a protocol, and then within a protocol there's a bunch of different markets, and then within those markets there are users or accounts that interact in those markets. And so, the way that I got to come up with presenting this is I'm actually working on something else. And I kind of started to think, well, this lending data would be really useful. And then you can go grab it from 7 different subgraphs today that are deployed on the network, but every single subgraph is implemented differently by a subgraph developer. And then as that data analyst, let's say, you have to go explore those 7 subgraphs code, and even sometimes you have to go explore the Solidity code when you don't understand fully what the subgraph is doing. And it just takes a long time. It's the whole cleaning of the data process that takes a lot of hours from a data analyst's day. So when you create a lending standard like this, you're really saving a lot of time and getting all the information in a nice, very clear and understandable way. And that's what I also tried to do with this schema was explain every single field and every single entity with good comments, because that's also one of the things that I think is lacking in the subgraph development space is a lot of people deploy their subgraphs and they don't put comments in them well, and they're usually deploying them in the context of their own organization or protocol or company. And then so you go read someone else's subgraph and you say, okay, this is interesting, I don't know what any of this means. And then you actually have to read their code, which takes a long time. So this standard is meant to be very simple, very just to the point. This is a bunch of lending protocols. We tie them all in, we abstract away what's happening and show you the actual functionality of how money is moving. And that's kind of the goal behind it. So I presented that and I tweeted it out, and there were, I think, 4 or 5 different people who reached out to me who are either working on something very similar or want to leverage something like this. And I don't know if I can say who they are, but a couple of well-known names for sure, well-known protocols. But they all happen to be going to ETH Denver. So I'm actually planning to kind of get everybody together there and go over, how to build this out so that there's no, people working on it and doing duplicate work and everything like that. So it's exciting. There's definitely demand for it. And I think DeFi and particularly lending is a good place to start with the subgraph standard. And then this kind of process, we'll see how it plays out, but it could lead to more standard subgraphs, which, like DEXs or other things. Even as Web3 expands, there's a lot of opportunity to have standards in a lot of other things, media-based things or NFT-based things, right? But ultimately, this is the indexer office hours. And I think what's interesting for indexers is, these kind of subgraphs definitely, just the amount of people who kind of reached out and said they're already thinking about this. I think there is an opportunity for these kinds of subgraphs to be queried a lot, because it's saving a lot of people time, and it's getting out the really core data that people want from lending protocols, which I think is part of the vision of the graph is to be able to give people the data not only through a decentralized manner, but also for a way to understand very clearly and very simply as well. So that's kind of where we're at with this.
That does sound extremely useful and great. We've been having many discussions with Dave regarding this particular proposal, and I remember I told him, yeah, it would be amazing to have like standards for like certain categories of subgraphs, as Dave mentioned, DEXs, lending protocols, NFT projects, maybe also like bridges. I think you mentioned bridges. But yeah, I mean, it's super useful, and as I'm seeing some comment from Jim, which says standardizing subgraphs means also standardizing how we approach the performance of indexing and serving those subgraphs, and I think it's totally right. And I think it will be, hopefully it will be the way to move forward with different but really related kind of projects like lending and categorized projects in a way, moving forward for the future of like serving those queries, especially regarding I've already like had many discussions with many other teams. One example that comes to mind is Instadap. Back in the day were trying to, well, they are kind of like aggregators, so they were trying to build a subgraph that had all the compound data, I think yearn data and some other like projects data, so that they could serve all the data they wanted, query all the data that they wanted from the same source from subgraphs without having to rely on third-party non-standard subgraphs. So having a standard there would mean like it would open up the usage of those particular subgraphs a lot. Also, as Dave mentioned, I don't want to hijack indexer office hours for something that is more subgraph related, but it does seem like a good thing to mention and discuss a little bit, since it would probably impact the landscape of the network if it goes through and works quite well in the near future. Yeah. Anyone has any comments?
I'll actually add something first there as well. So like my kind of plan, like I haven't written any of the mapping code yet, but the way I envision it is like likely this kind of subgraph, if you're going to tie in 5 or 6 or 7 different lending protocols, is going to take a lot of effort to index. And I know there's stuff being worked on to speed that up, but like it's kind of, you don't really know until you run the subgraph how long it's going to take. And arguably it might not be too bad, because if you can get a lot of the protocols, if you can just run event handlers and do it off of the event signatures and not have to do like contract calls to your Ethereum node, it could actually go quite fast. But of course, like sub or smart contract developers don't always do that. So, you know, even if you tie in one major lending protocol where you have to start querying an Ethereum node directly, it's going to slow it down. So then it becomes a question of like, well, can you actually combine this subgraph into one subgraph, a single subgraph with, you know, 7 different protocols in the manifest? Or do you actually have to split it up into 7 different subgraphs so that it syncs in enough time? And I think that's something that we'll figure out when it actually gets built. But it will be a good, you know, testing ground for a subgraph that is likely going to be queried a lot and likely has a lot of uses, or has a lot of has a desire to be a single subgraph. And we might be able to do that off the get-go, or it might be, you know, orders of magnitude too slow. And I think it would be a worthwhile place to check out, like, you know, the indexing performance for the subgraph.
Totally.
I think that unless we have Firehose integrated into mainnet, seeing similar big subgraphs, making this into one giant subgraph might be a too tall order, at least until we have Firehose integrated. All these giant subgraphs are very slow to sync, which mean doing your due diligence to sync them in advance or migrating to a new version is very time consuming. So my inclination would be that it needs to be separate subgraphs, at least until we have the Firehose really integrated for mainnet use.
It might also be composable not directly into a single subgraph, but rather have something that composes all the pre-synced subgraphs, so to speak, Basically, you run all of them in parallel, and then you compose them afterwards. Maybe there are some possibilities there, Adam. I saw you're pretty interested in discussing that.
Yeah, I think this is super interesting proposal in general, just in terms of standards. I think if we like standards, I think would be great in general, and I think it'd be great if we could also follow in the same way that there are like Ethereum standards where there's a sort of EIP associated with sort of 712 and those kind of things. Like I think it would be awesome if this could go down that route too. In terms of the performance, yeah, like that definitely will be a consideration. I think that this is like a composition, but it's a particular type of composition because you're sort of just wanting to union these like matching compatible schemas. So that is maybe a different special case, but yeah, like hopefully we will have the firehose on mainnet soon. Like there's that is pretty close at this point. But yes, as Dave said, I think the best way to find out is to also sort of build some and then see how they're looking. And then it could also be a really good case for focusing on how we can improve the indexing performance too.
Totally, completely agree. Does anyone have anything to add to this, or should we move to Sam's discussion about the stale allocation for indexers? Okay, seems like we can move on. Thanks for being here, Dave. I know it's pretty on short notice, but yeah, pretty much appreciated. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem.
Sam, is your mic working now?
Let's see. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh my God. Okay, great. Okay, so let's see. So I'm hoping to get some feedback from everybody today. There is a proposal right now in the GIP section of the forums called Rewarded Force Close Mechanism to eliminate stale allocations. Currently, and just so to give some credit, Alexi started this conversation, and yeah, so I'd like to kind of recognize that. So today we have there's a little over 600, I think around 640 open allocations, and 200 of them are stale. So we have about a third of our allocations are stale right now. And let me just get to the point, and that is Brandon has posted something called proposed modified design underneath in that proposal under the reward force close proposal. And the idea that we'd like to get feedback on is that basically there are two things. One, we would like to subsidize anyone to be able to close stale allocation. So as was mentioned earlier, PR 543 is some modified is a PR related to allowing anyone to close stale allocations, but that PR would still require you the closer to pay for that, and so it raises the barrier to entry. And so we would like to subsidize people to be able for anybody to be able to force close stale allocations. The subsidization would come through what's called a keeper reward, and this is under the proposed modified design section comment that Brandon left in the GIP. And basically, as soon as 28 epochs passes, then some fixed amount would be provided to the keeper. A keeper is what we're calling the person who force closes the allocation. If that fixed amount of GRT isn't enough to cover the gas costs, then what we would do is either every block past the 28-day period, every block, that keeper amount would increase linearly. So it would just keep going up, and up. And that amount, by the way, would come from the zombie indexers stake. So they would pay for the keeper after their force closed. And then in addition to that keeper reward for force closing allocation, there would be damages awarded to all indexers that were also allocated on the subgraph. And those damages would be, what we would do is we would calculate how many rewards would the zombie indexer have received had they closed after 28 epochs? And of course, we're assuming that they're closing with a valid POI. And those rewards would come not through issuance, but they would also come from the zombie indexer's stake. So two sources. There's the keeper reward that's going to subsidize gas costs. And two, after the force close, every indexer who is allocated would get rewarded proportionally to their stake as normal, except the rewards no longer come from issuance in this case. They come from the zombie indexer themselves. So yeah, so I'd like to get some feedback. If anybody has any feedback or responses to this, I'd like to capture it.
From my side, the only things that I've been thinking about in this particular proposal is how viable it is from a contracts perspective to do the distribution of the let's say the rewards based on the stake of the indexer that is behaving abnormally. So would that distribution be done by the person closing the allocation? And if so, that would require a lot more gas, so it would be like a pretty expensive operation. But if it's going to be subsidized anyway, I think it might be viable. I'm just not sure if it would be viable from like a gas perspective, if it's going to reach like way too much gas for a transaction or something.
Yeah, that's a good point. What this is going to do is it would, it seems like this would increase the, basically it would raise the floor of the amount allocated by the zombie indexer. And so then there are a bunch of small subgraphs that don't have much on it. And, you know, the indexer, it's going to come from the indexer's stake, but nevertheless, it's going to increase the minimum amount that needs to be staked, or that the indexer needs to have staked to make it so it's worth it, or so that it'll work.
Yeah, there might be some situations where that happens too. So yeah, I see Jim and Jedito typing. So yeah, checking Jim's comment to play devil's advocate. What is the exact objective here? Ensuring indexers tends to their allocations, right? And is there a simpler, more elegant way to achieve the same objective? That's a question for you, Sam, I think.
Yeah, well, at a high level, what to me I think is what's important is that right now the protocol has a goal of 3% inflation per year, and in 2021 we reached 2.7% inflation. So basically we hit 90% of the target. In other words, we didn't hit 10% of the target, and that 10% would have been distributed to all of the indexers. And so that means that all of the honest indexers had decreased earnings of about 10% relative to what they could have achieved last year. And that's not just because of stellar allocations. It's a combination of stellar allocations plus closing with zero POIs. And with PR 544, that was discussed earlier. That's going to require valid POIs when opening, and of course subgraphs can still have bugs which would require us to close with zero POIs. But if we could get rid of all of these stale allocations, and if we could make it so that we weren't closing with zero POIs, we would all increase. On average, we would increase our revenue by 10%. And of course, the necessity is that we eventually move to bringing in revenue through queries. In fact, yeah, that's our existential goal. But as it stands, the bootstrapping, the index and rewards are part of this bootstrapping mechanism. And so it's basically this kind of, well, it's a significant inefficiency that we're trying to get rid of. In terms of more elegant solutions, I'm all ears about how we could other alternatives to force closing the allocations.
Yeah, I mean, the main issue is that the stale allocations are actually sapping away rewards from actual active indexers that are actually serving queries. So getting rid of those and having an incentive to get rid of those would be great. I think maybe, I don't know how this would impact the rewards calculation, which is pretty complex already. But if you had like, if the 28 epochs were like a complete absolute maximum, and after you go over 28 epochs, you're not only risking yourself for closing, for someone else closing your allocations by forfeiting the rewards, but it would be also awesome to have it so that you're no longer accruing any rewards at all. But I don't know if that's viable from a contract execution perspective. So that would also be some sort of other way of fixing this. So you just don't really need to close the stale allocations if they are not non-profitable for closing, but you could just like remove them from the rewards calculation. But again, I don't know if that's viable, but that could be another potential fix to this.
Yeah,
I like Juan's idea there. I was also just wondering, like, is it not enough incentive just without subsidizing gas if, other indexers will earn more by force closing others' allocations
The
that are
thing
expired?
is, there are way too many allocations open with relatively small amounts of GRT on them. So
Okay.
the gas cost is greatly exceeding the profits from. Depends on the time horizon though. But yeah, I don't want to forget like 𝗨𝗀𝗂𝗧 66. I think you said it. I think that's an equitable procedure from a delegator's perspective. Delegators get the rewards at the expense of the indexer instead of the protocol subsidizing the closures via issuance. I'm not sure that the proposal distributes rewards to the delegators of an indexer that is not behaving correctly. But maybe you have some clearance for that, like some clarity.
I think the first thing that comes to my mind is that it might lead to, if we did that, it could end up being a way for indexers to self-delegate, and then, well, I mean, that's actually an interesting proposal. I'll add that, and I'll bring it into the discussion.
Yeah, it is an interesting point to the discussion, for sure. Alexis also said, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I was just say, looking at it, I definitely think stale allocations are a problem, seeing that there are quite a few indexers with, like 20 parallel allocations of 10 carry GRT, which obviously would cost a ton of gas for very little outcome like you were talking about. I would say the only thing I personally worry about is it becoming a little too gamified, and it wouldn't basically like an indexer going on the same allocation that they plan to close on, delegating to it and having a bot scripted to auto close anything or automatically allocate to a stale allocation, delegate 0.1 GRT and close it, and that just kind of being basically one indexer kind of taking over all the stale allocations. I mean, getting rid of stale allocations obviously is the goal. I just worry about the gamification of it possibly.
Yeah, there are a few caveats to those, but I think it's all good feedback for Sam on the proposal itself. So it was great that we can discuss this here. We're over the top of the hour, so I don't want to extend that much more. We could probably keep discussing this next IOH. So yeah, we'll have more time there to discuss this. Does anyone have any closing remarks or anything that they want to say before we close?
Yeah, I think it might be good to define what is a stale allocation or what is a zombie indexer. Is it allocation based? Is it indexer based? Is it the second you go over 28 epochs, or is it something much wider net? Like if it's still open, like double the amount of epochs or something. These are quite different scenarios. So it might be good to define those.
I think it was well defined in the proposal itself. I think it's everything that goes well beyond 28 allocation, 28 epochs on a single allocation. There has been some analytics stats there in the proposal too, but yeah, mainly are those like allocations that have like 100+ days or something. But it would be cool to have it like well defined, I guess.
Actually, I think it is well defined. We have a 28 days maximum, and the first block after 28 epochs, then the indexer zombie and the allocation stale, and it should be closed.
Yeah, I disagree. At least in the part of subsidizing that's where I would disagree.
Yeah, I think there are a few points there that maybe the subsidy for like just very close like 29 30 days allocations might not need to be really incentivized, because it might be just like, okay, the indexer is having some issues closing it or something. It's not the same as 190 days, but yeah. Okay, I don't want to extend this further. It's been a great IOH. We'll be discussing this topic also next week because it seems to be extremely important. So yeah, if anyone has any extra comments, feel free to leave them in chat, and we'll be picking it up for the next agenda for next IOH. So yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you guys.